Andrea, is there anyone else on the finance committee who we're missing?
Is Diane's here?
Yeah.
Yes.
Nicole?
No, I haven't seen Nicole.
Trying to think of who else is on finance.
Jim is on finance. Becky's on finance. Jack is on finance. And
Chris McLaughlin?
Chris is not here.
Let me just give him a quick call, see if he got the link.
Okay.
This reminds me of the good old days of COVID. Soon to be forgotten. Soon to be forgotten.
He's coming. His computer had to do an update and it wouldn't let him in until he did it. I think he's not a Mac guy. That's what I think. Not that I would judge. All the serious spaces. And the picture of our boardroom completely empty. That's kind of funny. Terry, are we live? Okay.
We are live.
There he is.
Great. Do we want to begin then, Becky? It is 5:34.
Sure. Good evening and welcome to our February 28th, 2023 Finance Committee meeting. It's been a long time since we've done one of these remotely. Feels a little unfamiliar and vaguely like something I'd like to forget moving forward. So thank you all for being here tonight. Terry, thank you so much for streaming. And I hope everyone is safe and not needing to go out in treacherous weather. I'll call us to order and I will ask Finance Committee members to introduce themselves. And you're all probably in a different, I'll pick the first person and the next person pick the person that, you know what I mean? So Meg, you introduce yourself.
Megan Carlson.
And then you call on the next person.
How do I call on the next person? Okay, Jim.
There you go.
Oh, that's a cop out. Hi, I'm Jim Lothridge. And Jack, you're up next.
I am Jack Bitteroff. Chris.
Chris McLaughlin. Diane.
Diane Potter. I don't know why my picture isn't up, but did you hear that?
Yes, we sure did. Thank you.
Okay, all right.
I think that's it for board members. So administrative staff, starting with Pat Hopkins.
Okay, Pat Hopkins, superintendent, and then to help expedite, why don't I call on people and then have them introduce themselves. So Nate?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Here.
Can you introduce who you are?
Oh, yeah, sorry. Nate Stubbert, Athletic Director.
Thank you. Andrea?
You're muted.
How about now?
Perfect.
Can you hear me? Andrea Dish, Business Manager.
Chad?
Chad Kempton, High School Principal.
Karen?
Karen Moody, Principal of Lower Richard School.
Tiffany?
Tiffany Cockrell, Interim Principal at Pittston Randolph.
Vicki?
Vicki Duguay, Principal at Riverview Community School.
Angela?
Angela Hardy, Director of Curriculum.
Alicia?
Alicia Morris, Director of Special Services.
Josh?
Josh Farr, Director of Adult Education.
Katie?
Katie Gould, Principal at Helen Thompson School.
Nicole?
Nicole Barton, Assistant Principal at Helen Thompson School.
Sarah?
Sarah Sims, Principal Gardner Regional Middle School.
Did I miss anyone?
Terry.
Right. That's Terry,
McGuire.
of course. Terry McGuire.
Right. Don't forget Terry.
Terry McGuire, Director of Technology.
Thank you. Well, we are living proof that there's no simple way to do introductions on Zoom. So we've lost our rhythm. So we've done our call to order. First thing on the agenda is discussion of the 2021-22 per pupil expenditures by budget category. So I'll hand that over to Pat or Andrea.
Before I go through that, I want to ask Andrea, you sent out a folder to board members. If you would just walk people through and make sure everyone knows how to access it, because the information I'm going to review is available to board members and members of the public, I believe, through those means. And then Andrea, would you also explain where my numbers actually come from? You're muted, Andrea.
There. So in Google Documents, I sent you a link. In that link, you need to sign in with your MSAD11 username and password. So you need to be in your MSAD11 user to be able to access your MSAD11 Google Drive. Once you are in, if you click the link that I sent you, it should open up a folder. Within that folder is a revised agenda for tonight's meeting, as well as separate folders for each of our topics of the conversation. The exception is the last two that were added. There's really no backup documentation. It's just more or less a conversation. So that is how you should be able to access everything in Google Drive. In addition, one of our board members was having issues accessing the documents. I've also sent them via email. So everyone should be able to open all of them. They're most of them are PDFs. The documents that I sent out via email, there may be one or two documents in Excel, and you would need to have a Microsoft Excel to be able to.
Excuse me one second. Andrea, I don't think that there were any attachments on your email.
So it didn't come back to me saying that it couldn't send those documents out. So I assumed that they were sent out. So everyone has a link here. So is there anybody who can't access the documents, I guess is the question. I don't hear from anybody, so I will assume that everyone can.
No, hey, that would be me. I cannot.
You still cannot.
No. Did you send an email out?
I sent an email out with every single document that we uploaded. Unfortunately, there were a lot of documents, Jim. So Terry's telling me that those documents did not get sent.
Yeah, it's what I called about earlier because I couldn't find anything.
So I sent that email out probably a little after 5.
Okay, I'm looking at one right now.
Do you see an email from me?
Yes, I do. I've got an empty desktop, but I don't see any attachments.
Yeah, mine doesn't. They don't have the one from 5:20 p.m. doesn't have any attachments.
There was one at 4:19 that has all kinds of PDFs.
Yeah.
So you got that, Chris?
Okay, let me take a look.
I did as well.
Oh, here we go. Yes, I've got that one.
4:19.
Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry. So I guess everybody's all set with documents. So what was the second half of your request, Pam? I'm sorry.
So in the documents that I will be reviewing, I asked you to explain where my numbers came from.
So annually, we are required, or I am required to upload data right from our accounting system 4 times a year into what's called NEO, which is the state database. And the state tells us how to code all of our expenditures. So all of those expenditures are uploaded on a quarterly basis. At the end of the fiscal year, there's the final upload for all of the expenditures through June. Once those expenditures are uploaded, they're verified against a district's financials. So the auditor basically, I upload the document, or I upload the data, and then I pull it back down for the auditor to verify that what is in our system is what was uploaded into the NEO, the state NEO system. So that data is managed. So where these reports come from at the end of the fiscal year, the Department of Education takes all of that data, and I'm by expenditure article, the same way that we look at our budget. So when we vote on our budget, we vote on regular instruction, special education, we vote on transportation and maintenance. They also created reports based on every school district's data. The data that Pat pulled down is called per pupil amounts. And what the data does is it adds up all of our data by these expenditure articles, and it tells you, or it tells anyone who looks at it, the amount that we spend in each of the expenditure articles based on the number of students in our district. So if you go onto the state website, you should be able to pull down the same report that I shared with you. It is also shared in other, in addition to sharing it by per pupil, the state also shares it by total expenditures. So that is the basis for Pat's report.
Thank you, Andrea. And can everyone see a document that I'm sharing right now? It's probably a little small, but this is one of the documents that you have in your folder. And this is the information that Andrea was just referencing. So this is the document created by the state. And you can see that they list every single school district. And then they break down the cost by cost centers. So we have the regular instruction, special ed, career tech, other instruction, student and staff support, system administration, school administration, transportation operations and maintenance, debt service, and all others. And so this provides you all of the backup detail for some information that I'm going to break down for you. So we have 257 school districts in the state. And of those, we are, I have to find where we are here. I lost it. We are only 38 school districts actually fall below what we spend per pupil. This actually is not the same form that I'm looking at in front of me, Andrea. So I'm not able to kind of pull out MSAD11. It's not in the same order that I have it in front of me. So I apologize. You can see that ours is down in this area. But in the form that I have, it shows that the school that spends the least amount per pupil, when you take into account all of these cost centers and you divide it out by the number of resident students, okay, or the resident pupil count, the school district that spends the least, they spend about $7,800 per student. They have 18 students in their district, and it's I don't know if I'm going to pronounce this correctly, so I apologize. It's called Wilmanatic School Department. It's my understanding that it's up in Piscataquis County. I've actually never heard of it before. And the school district that spends the most is Frenchboro, so one of the island schools. And they have only 2 students out there. And so their cost per pupil is $79,000. Yeah, it's a lot. Versus ours, we are at 12,846. So what I did, let me share a different screen with you. Let me see. It's not the screen I want to share. Let's stop sharing that again. Let me go back here. Give me just 1 second, please. Okay. Let's try this. And you have this document. Okay. So I created this document. And what I did is I took the state average, and I listed that, I provided that information in the first column. I then looked at other area school districts. These are the very similar school districts to the ones that we always compare ourselves to at the end of the budget process when we develop our budget book. This time I thought, well, I'm going to front load this. I'm going to provide this information at the beginning versus at the end of our process. So you will see that the state average is $16,248 per pupil. Then you will see hours at 12,846. And then I provided the same information for Augusta, for RSU 2, which is the Hollowell area, RSU 4, which is Litchfield, 12, which is the Chelsea area. And then we have RSU 18, which is Oakland, Marana, Cook, Fairfield, Skowhegan, Winthrop, Winslow, and Waterville, because they're all in the Kennebec Valley Superintendents Association. So that was the group that I grabbed. And so if you look through, you will see how we compare for across the board. And across the board, when you look at all of those cost centers, we spend the least for any other school district. I then, if you look at the next box, I broke it down a little bit further, and I actually pulled out CTEs, which would be our tech centers, because not every school district, such as ourselves, we don't pay for the tech center. In our situation, Augusta pays for it. So I felt like it wasn't fair to really compare cost centers, right, and per pupil if I kept that that line item in there. So I pulled those out, and some school districts have debt service, some school districts do not. So I pulled out debt service. So when you pull those out, those two items, those two lines, then you come up with a different cost per pupil. When you calculate this out using the updated cost per pupil, then you will see that Augusta does spend less per pupil than we do by $377. And then you can see how we align with all of these other area school districts. Then I went one step further and provided a budget impact. So if we were to budget the same or an equivalent per pupil amount in our district for any of these other districts, I provided how much money would be impacted in our budget. So for example, in Augusta, because their per pupil is $377 less than ours, then our budget would decrease by $724,000. In RSU 2, if we were to spend the same amount that they spend per pupil, we'd be adding $4 million to our budget. In RSU 4, we'd be adding close to $1.7 million to our budget, and so forth. So, and if we match the state average, we'd be adding $4.2 million. So we had talked about this in previous meetings, and we just thought that this was helpful information for us to have in advance of our budget development process. So that's what I have, and I guess I would open it up to questions. And it's a lot of information to absorb. Tonight, we're giving you a lot of information, so we certainly understand that you may need to take some time, absorb it, and then come back to our next meeting with questions. And that's fine as well, of course.
Pat, one of the things that that I find interesting, and this is I think the second time that we've done our budget process over Zoom, but I'm wondering, and I'm glad we're doing it this way, I'm wondering if the average person that might be watching this, or the average parent of a student within the district, or many students within the district, understands that there really is a cost per pupil, and that's how it's broken out. So that part is, I think, probably a different way of thinking about education, and an important thing to be certain that our parents and community members understand, that we don't just pull these numbers out of the air and assign values to them. They are actual figures that we are required to follow in the state statute and through the ED 279, our funding formula. So I would love it if people took a moment to just sort of digest this by community to see exactly what we're doing. And I'm sorry about my bird. I'll mute myself.
Well, and I think some of this ties back into conversations that the Finance Committee has previously had regarding the number of buildings that we have. When you think about Augusta, they have consolidated a lot of their schools. And as a result of that consolidation and closing some of their schools, they realized a savings in their budget, a real-time savings. As long as the community wants us to continue with our 4 elementary schools, there's a cost associated with that. And so it does cost more to operate those buildings. And there would be a cost savings if we were operating under just one roof.
Is it worth trying to pull that information together so that we can speak specifically to what the costs are for each of our buildings now? Not that we're planning on doing anything immediately, but just to know.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not ready to share a screen with you, but I have done a little bit of work in the background, and this is just preliminary. So an example, and again, these are really rough numbers. I haven't spent any time diving into it and really trying to get something concrete. But an example is with our current enrollment, operating with 4 elementary schools, we have 51 teachers or instructional staff, actually classroom teachers. This doesn't take into account special ed teachers or anything along those lines. And if we were operating in one building, and I follow the school board policy on class sizes, that 51 would be reduced to 45. And so that's 6 fewer classroom teaching positions. If you just say with benefits and salary, throw out $80,000, then that's a $480,000 savings right there. Then there would probably be a savings in library and nursing services and special ed and ed techs and Title I and food service and custodial services, administrative assistance, administration. That plus the 480,000, that comes to almost $1.2 million. That is not looking at facilities. That's not a savings. It's not looking at transportation. And again, that is just me sitting down one day and kind of randomly coming up with some projected savings. So I would share that, Becky, if that's what you're asking for.
Yes, I think so. And it might get to the place where we need to have a deeper look.
Can I say one thing? As you know, I don't approve of that, but I would like to see, if we're going to do that, I'd like to see what that brand new school is going to cost us in debt service, because it isn't going to come free. You're probably looking at $45 million. I know it'll be over a 30-year period, but if we're going to look at the cost savings in staff and services, then I'd also like to look at costs of debt service and what it's going to cost to build that building and what we're going to do with the 4 schools we have. So.
Well, sorry.
Go ahead.
The hope would be the state is opening up their school construction list to start that. I think we are in a good place. 2 of our elementary schools currently have modulars. If the CDS conversation comes around, we have no room to put those CDS students, and it's my understanding that it's coming back around. So I would hope that we could get on the construction list and do it that way, rather than trying to self-fund or fund our own elementary school locally.
Andrea, you're right about that. In our legislative committee meeting today, there is another bill coming around regarding CDS and the birth to age 4 conversation. And it didn't have the fiscal note. It was because it was turned down last time. So this is like a recreation concept bill. So it's not far off the horizon. It's going to come back, if not in this session, in the next one.
And it's my understanding as well, Becky, that there is a bill, maybe it's already been passed, that will require the Department of Education to conduct a thorough assessment of all schools throughout the state, so that they really get a better understanding of what the physical needs are of buildings.
Correct.
And that needs to be done, I think, by 2024.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and I'm not sure it's passed yet, but yes, that is out there, and it's specifically designed to open it up so that that needs are part of the equation, not just the building is falling down, and it's for much other, and none of our buildings are falling down. Don't
right. Historically, those who have not taken care of their buildings, right, have been rewarded with a new school. So.
Right. And we take such good care. We're such good stewards with all of our facilities that we fall far down on the list, regardless of what our needs might be, as far as our spacing and what makes good space. So yes, there is something on the horizon.
So that's all that I have for the per pupil expenditures, but I wanted to put that out there, and I wanted to give people an opportunity to really review. I think it's very telling. You know, we talk about our needs as district and how we're struggling. We have such limited resources for our staff and for many of our programs, and we are burning people out because we don't always provide enough support because our budget is so lean. And so my hope is to just give us an opportunity to see what level other schools districts are spending at, just to keep in our minds, our back of our minds, as we're thinking about or beginning to start this budget development process. I really am worried about our ability, our staff's ability to continue providing the level of support that we're providing in some cases, unless we get some additional support for our staff.
Agreed. Are we ready to move on to the next item on the agenda?
Yes.
Okay, so the next item on the agenda is the ED 279, the state funding overview.
And that will be Andrea.
Yes, ma'am.
So this conversation is difficult to have in person because it's so complicated. So it's going to be even more difficult to have over Zoom. So what I have provided in the folder to you is 4 documents. One of them is the ED 279 for next year, FY24. I also provided you with a copy of the ED 279 from FY23, which is the year that we are currently in. You also have another document that is a side-by-side comparison of all of the pages in the ED 279. So as you flip through, I think there's 6 pages, you will see last year's compared to this year's. I have also provided you state data on funding for all of the school districts in the state so that you can see a comparison. I think that if we were in the boardroom and having this in person, it would be easier to flip back and forth with documents. But I think for the sake of this conversation, what I'm going to do is discuss the FY20 the ED 279 for this year, and explain to those people who have no idea what it is that I'm talking about, what it is and how it's important to our budget. So the ED 279 is the mechanism that the state uses to disperse funds to all school districts throughout the state. And there are two main drivers in this calculation. The first one is pupils, the number of pupils in your district, and the other is valuation. Valuation meaning the valuation for each town served by a school district. So in our case, it would be the state valuations for our 4 communities, Gardner, West Gardner, Pittston, and Randolph. And that is what really drives the ED 279. So I am going to attempt to share this year's ED 279, and I'm going to go through it with you page by page. And I'm going to try not to get stuck in the weeds. I live it. So sometimes I go on, but it's important that you have a broad understanding of how this works and where we are in comparison to last year's ED 279. So let's see if I can share my screen. Sorry, I'm used to doing Google Meet, and this whole Zoom thing just completely confuses me. So I'm out of practice.
Looks good, Andrea.
Okay. So this is the ED 279 for next year. This is what we're working on. In section 1, the whole point of this section is to create both, if you can see my cursor, both an elementary and a secondary per pupil cost. And the way that the state does this is it starts throwing figures in a bucket, but this is a separate bucket than the bucket we're going to discuss later. So know that I'm going to talk about 2 buckets. This is the bucket that we're going to use to create those per pupil expenditures. So the first section of this is actually attending pupil counts. So every year on October 1st, the district takes a snapshot of every student that we have, and Terry reports it to the state, and it's validated by the superintendent. So what you see in section 1A is our per pupil counts for attending students, which is different than residential students and superintendent students. So this also includes tuition students that we may have and other things. It's students attending. And the state breaks them out. State breaks it out in pre-K, grades 1 to 5, grades 6 to 8, and then it kind of summarizes it again as pre-K to 8 and 9 to 12. So first you see the October 21st count from last fiscal year, and now you see the October 22 count from a few months ago. And then what it does is it creates an average over these 2 years. Everybody with me so far? In section B, what the state does is it has created staff positions that serve students in one way or another. And it has created a staff to student ratio for all of these positions. So when we're talking about teacher positions in section on page 1B, we're not talking about special ed teachers. We're talking about regular ed teachers and teachers paid within the regular budget. So we have received ARP money. You'll hear me talk about it as ESER 3 money. Those teachers are federally funded and are not included in this section, so to speak. So the state says that the student to staff ratio for pre-K to K is 15:1. So based on all of the students that we have, so if I divide pre-K to K by 15, it says that I should have 14.5 pre-K to K teachers. It says that I should have the student to staff ratio for 1 to 5. The state says that it allows 17:1 ratio. And it says, according to the number of grade 1 to 5 students that we have, that we should have 38.85. I don't know what an 8.85 teacher is, but that's what they say that we should have. This is grade 6 to 8. Again, there's a 17:1 staff to student ratio. And for high school, it's a 16:1 staff to student ratio. So the EPS FTE total is what the state says that we should have for teachers, regular instructional teachers, pre-K to grades 12 in our district is 118.57. We actually have 130 teachers pre-K to grades 12. So what the state then does is it takes all of these staff members that I'm talking about, and the state has created its own salary matrix based on what they think salary should be for teachers in the state of Maine. It has, similar to the way that we track teachers by bachelor's, master's, and CAS, it also has that. So as teachers gain experience in districts, they also move along in the state matrix. So the state says that based on their matrix, if they plop our teachers in, those teachers in the matrix are worth $7,802,000. Because we have more teachers than what the state says that they're allowing for our formula, I guess that's a good way to put it. There is then a divisor. So if I divide 118.57, which is the teachers say they say we should have, by our actual teachers, we get a ratio of 0.91. It then applies this 0.91 ratio to the entire salary matrix. And it comes up with an adjusted EPS salary. So it's basically 0.91% of the 7.8 million. It then takes this figure and it uses the percentage for pre-K to 8 up here, and the percentage of 9 to 12, and it applies this. So then it basically starts creating those two separate buckets for elementary and secondary. Everybody with me so far? Okay. I am not going to go through every single line in B, but this is what it does. So it does this for guidance. Included in guidance is also social workers. So it says that according to the state's calculation, we should have 6.27 guidance or social workers. We actually have 8. Librarians, according to the state, we should have 2.44 librarians. We have 2. Now, I just want to be clear, this isn't ed tech librarians. This is librarians like the librarians that we have at the high school and the middle school. So Amy, Biermeister and Deb Butterfield. So that's who it's specifically referring to. Health is our school nurses. So this snapshot was taken again, like the student snapshot. I am also doing a staff snapshot at the very same time. I am doing a snapshot of the staff that we have when the state says freeze. So at the time that the state said freeze, we had 5 nurses. The state says that they allow 2.44. Ed techs, this is regular ed techs. Again, this is not special ed techs. The state says that according to their calculations, based on our students, We should have 11.11. We actually have 25. Library ed techs, according to the state, we should have 3.9. We actually have 5. Clerical, which is our school administrative assistants, the state says, according to the students that we have, they allow for 9.74. We actually have 11. And school administrators, based on the number of students we have, the state says that their formula allows for 6.32. We actually have 9.5. So this is section B of this first page. The second page is where they throw money into this bucket for benefits. So it is basically on line 1, it has added all of the teacher or the teacher-like positions. So teachers, guidance librarians, and the school nurses from above. It's taken their salaries over here and it's added them together and it's multiplied it by 26%. So it's basically thrown in money for benefits for these individuals in elementary and secondary. The same thing with ed and library ed techs, the same thing for administrative assistants, and the same thing for school administrators. So now we're starting to add more in both into the elementary and the secondary column. In section D, other support per pupil costs. So this is where the state gives us an amount per student for things. So for substitute teachers for half a day, you will see here for pre-K through 8, for every student that we have pre-K through 8, the state will give us $49 to add into these 2 buckets. So if you multiply, this is your total elementary students. If you multiply that by 49, you'll get 65,121. And if you multiply the total secondary students by 49, you'll get the 30,331. Supplies and equipment, there is a per student cost for elementary and secondary. Professional development, it's $71 each. Instructional leadership support, it's $34 for every student in the district, pre-K through 12. Co and extracurricular student support, which is all of our after-school activities and athletics. It allows $45 per elementary student and $137 per secondary student. System administration, which is the board, it's the business office, as well as the superintendent's administration. It allows $135 per student. And operations and maintenance, it allows $1,212 per pre-K through 8 and $1,439 for 9 through 12. So after we've done all of that, the state then does a regional salary adjustment. So it basically places all of these school districts in regions. With, I believe Portland is the highest, but don't quote me on it. And then adjusts other regions based on how they compare to Portland. So we have a regional index of 0.95. So it's added up these 2 columns. So all of these figures here and all of these figures there, and it's subtracted 0.5% of that total from each. The total is then $10,193,393 for elementary, $5,042,976 for secondary, divided by the number of students. That's how the state then gets its per pupil rate for both elementary and secondary. Woohoo! That's page 1.
Andrea?
Yep, I hear you.
Two things. One, can you remind us, when was the last time that some of these numbers or some of the ratios were actually changed since this formula was initially created back, I don't remember how many years ago now. And then 2, going back to the staff positions, looking where we are, that we employ more staff than what is allowed by the formula. A lot of that goes back to what we were just discussing, right? That if we had one building, there would be some reductions here. But because we have the duplication of buildings or 4 buildings, there is a duplication of services. And so that does increase the number of staff that we employ. Is that correct?
You are absolutely correct. Did you ask me to elaborate on something, or?
Yeah, I just didn't know if you could, if you remember the last time that this formula was actually modified, because I mean, we know in the last 3 years, or at least since COVID, the needs of our students have changed, right? And the demands on teachers have changed. So as we look at health and we say that all we need is to have 2.44 counselors and social workers, I mean, we know that that's not the reality. School districts across the state, across the country, are scrambling to hire more social workers to support students. And so I'm just wondering, again, when was the last time that was, these numbers were actually adjusted?
So after COVID, the state tweaked with a few of the staff to students ratios to allow for learning interruption, but they were only 1 year. I'm just going to give you a quick history of ED 279. So the ED 279 was developed when there became a push for the state to pay 50% of education. And at that time, it was basically 50% of what everybody spent. And obviously that's unsustainable, because if the schools just keep spending, then there would be no end. So their answer to this was the ED 279. And we've had it for quite a while. Several years ago, and don't ask me how many, they meaning the state, did a huge look at the funding formula to see, and there were hearings, and they hired a firm, and don't ask me off the top of my head the name of the firm that they hired, but they delved into all of these components. And at that point, it was decided that the formula was insufficient. It doesn't address all of the needs of school districts. At that point, the state just chose to shelve the study, because but the bottom line here is the state has X amount of dollars, and this is just a mechanism for dividing that amongst school districts. While it would be nice for them to be able to pour a lot of extra money, and this is how they see it to be divided most equitably. Now, some people will say that valuation isn't a good indicator, because a town has a high valuation is no indicator of taxpayers' ability to pay. But if not that, I guess then how would you, what would you use? And then the other piece is obviously the enrollment piece, the student data. So the state knows that this doesn't, I mean, for instance, the co and extracurricular, I mean, we spend far more than $137 per student for our extra and co-curricular. It's not adequate. And we will talk about that when we talk about the need for the additional appropriation, and I will go through where that comes in. So, or the additional assessment. Is there anything else you want me to cover on page 1?
No, I'm good.
Okay. So page 2, here we go again, but this one's a little bit easier. So all you need to remember from page 1 is, and you don't even need to remember them because they're written, is those 2 little rates at the bottom of the page. So on the top of page 2, The state talks about subsidizable students, which is different than attending students. Subsidizable students are students who live within our 4 communities, and it also includes superintendent's transfers. So those students that we get to count from another district that PAD allows to either come in or one of our students to go out. So we get to count them on our count. And these are counted in our subsidizable pupils. So you'll see, just similar to the attending students, there's the October 21 count and the October 22 count. In some instances below, the state does not use the average for the pre-K count. It actually uses the current year only and doesn't average. So when we get to that, but these are our figures. So for 4-year-olds pre-K, we have an average of 84.5 students. For K to 8, we have an average of 1,247, 9 to 12, 587 for a total district 2-year average of 1918 and a half. So this is where the real, so we're going to forget about the other bucket other than the 2 items that those 2 figures at the bottom, and we're going to start a brand new bucket. So it takes our students 4-year-old to pre-K, and it does the average. Do you remember when I said up above that it only uses the most recent for kindergarten? So it's pulling the 77 from up here, and it's multiplying it by that elementary tuition rate that we calculated on page 1. So if you did the calculation, you'd get 590,590. K to 8, 9 to 12. Everybody with me? So I'm on line B3. Line 4, adult education courses at point 1. These are school age adult education students. And for every class they take, it's 0.1. So it's those students who are school age who are accessing adult ed. And they throw some money in the bucket for that. Lines 5, 6, and 7 are what we call equivalent instruction students. They're students who don't attend here on a full day, but may come in for gym or may come in for math. And Terry has captured those in her student counts. So it says that we have no for to pre-K equivalent students. We have a student who's accessing 0.750 K to 8, and we have an equivalence or a student or students accessing at 0.875. And if you do the calculation times the secondary rate, it goes into our big bucket. Here, there's no elementary and secondary bucket. It's just one bucket. So the next section is C, weighted counts. So this district gives money for certain classes of students. And the first one is disadvantage. We refer to them as our free and reduced lunch counts. And the one thing that I want to call to your attention is our free and reduced lunch count. Can you see the new one that I just popped up or no? This one's pink and blue. No? Okay, never mind. I won't show it to you.
Oh, no, I think it was there, Andrea.
Was it?
Yeah, I could see it. Yeah.
Do you see pink and blue?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think nobody's picking up.
So this is last year's ED 279. It's a different color, but right here is our free and reduced lunch count from this year, which I keep referring to as last year, but it's actually this year. So if you compare 42.22% to, our current rate of 0.3720, you will see that our disadvantaged free and reduced lunch numbers are down. And the reason for that is that the state, and I think it's a great thing, has made lunch free for all students. So there is no longer a need for students to fill out that free and reduced application. But what is not understood is that we receive a lot of our federal monies based on that free and reduced lunch, percentage. And when it drops, so does our funding for Title I, Title II. So that's an area that we're definitely going to lose. So oops, sorry.
Andrea, can I just add to that? The other issue is it's not just about families not completing the information because they now have access to free meals. The other challenge is across the country, we're seeing such an increase in salaries, right, in hourly rates, yet the federal government has not changed the eligibility income. And so many families who once qualified no longer qualify. While the need may still exist, they don't qualify just because the federal government has not adjusted those income rates in a number of years.
That's a good point, Pat. Thank you.
A number of years. Let's reiterate that, like a number. Yeah. So based on the free and reduced rate of 0.3720, and actually it's a pre-K through K-8 rate. And because years ago, there's always been a struggle with getting high school age students to return their completed free and reduced applications. For the purpose of the ED 279, the state has always used the pre-K to 8 rate percentage at the high school level. So you'll see it's the same here. That's just what they do. You will see that if you took our 4-year-olds and pre-K students and you multiplied that total by 0.3720, you would get 28.6 pupils. The same thing with K to 8, 9 to 12. The EPS rate is it's a weighted average, so they're giving us 15%. I believe that's a reduction from last year, times either the elementary or the secondary rate. Again, money in our pocket. And let me, I just want to show you quickly, see if I can do this. Okay, so this is the comparison that I was talking about. And I just want to flip here. So this is actually mirrors, I'm right in here. This is where our where we are in the ED 279 for this year. This is the comparison between this year and last year. And you'll see in red, this is money that we're losing in our formula, in our calculation, based on that reduction of our free and reduced rate. So it's just the difference between last year and this year. And I'm gonna make that go away, but I just wanted you to see. So $23,000 between this year and last year, 225,000 K to 8 and 126,000. So it's just one of the biggest loss areas in the calculation. So I'm done with that. But you feel free to look at it on your own. That's why I provided it. So the next section in weighted counts is, again, additional money for certain categorizations of students. This is English language learners, ELL, ESL. I'm not quite sure. There are other acronyms, but currently we have 0 for pre-K, or at this time, at the time of the count, we had none in kindergarten and pre-K. We had 7 K to 8, and we had 4, 9 to 12. This is the EPS weight that they use, 0.70 times that elementary and the secondary rate. Again, money in our new bucket. Targeted funds. This is section D. This is the money that the state gives us for targeted purposes. So lines 1, 2, 3, student assessments, number of
students based on a per pupil amount, EPS target, $54. Again, money in our calculation. Our technology resources for those grades, you'll notice that there's a difference between elementary and secondary for technology resources. And again, we're throwing money in the bucket. They throw additional money in for 4-year-old to 2 for additional class size, reduced class sizes, because the grade spans for that age group tend to be smaller because of, well, just because it's what's needed at that grade level. So there's additional monies for that. And then there's an additional amount for disadvantaged targeted. So they throw a little bit more. Again, this is, I believe, a reduction from previous years, but I would need to look. So you see the same numbers as before from disadvantage. They carried them down. The EPS weight of 0.05, again, times our elementary and secondary rate from page 1. And if we add it all together, the total operating allocation is $16,995,758.29, page 2. So on page 3, all of these other things that we haven't talked about, this is where gifted and talented special education, transportation come into play. So gifted and talented, the way that they give us money for gifted and talented is they look at our expenditures for a base year. So for the base year, they used $216,807.43, and then they inflated it for adjustment and adjusted it for inflation, sorry. So again, from page 1, they're still adding money into this same bucket. So they've thrown $221,000 for gifted and talented. Now, I often get asked if gifted and talented is funded in full from the state, and the answer is no. The amount that we spend is added into our budget based on our expenditures. It's not based on what we budget, but you will see when I get further into this formula that there's a split and I will show you what I mean at that time. So special education, the EPS allocation is very complicated. It's a 7-step system. It's basically based on the number of kids that you identify as special ed and a prevalence rate. So the state prevalence rate is 15%. So if you have less than 15%, they give you additional money for those special ed students. And it's a combination of, it's a different rate that they use. It's kind of a blended rate that they use for elementary and secondary, and it has a multiplier, and it's much more favorable than the rate that we're talking about from page 1. And if anybody really wants to look at the special education calculation, I'd be happy to walk them through it, but it's just a bit much. In addition, if we have special education students identified over 15%, those students over the 15% prevalence rate, those monies are tossed in the special ed calculation at a much reduced level. I would say about a third. So for the first 15%, it's probably a multiplier of, don't quote me, I want to say 1.7, and then the rest only above the 15 probably get 0.3 based on the tuition rate. It then does adjustments for high cost in-district and out-of-district students. So if you have high cost in-district and out-of-district students for the previous year, it throws more money in. And then it looks at expenditures versus the calculation, and it gives you actually the higher of the two. So based on the calculation that I gave you, a very rough idea of, they are throwing 3.789, 3 million and change into this bucket. So you can see below that our special education high out of district allocation, those are the monies that we spend over and above the threshold that the state sets for out of district placements. So they set a threshold, and if any of those placements are above the threshold that they set, then we get additional money for those. Okay. Transportation again has its own allocation. It's basically it's a comparative of what the state says that you should get for transportation based on the mileage in your district and your actual expenses, and you actually get the less of the two calculations. So for us, we seem to always get the less of the two. So for our transportation operating allocation, they threw in this bucket approximately 1.5 million. So if you add this page, items 1 through 5 that I just discussed, it adds up to $5.7 million. The next section is B, teacher retirement amount. The state throws money into their calculations for what we call main PERS retirement. And I just want to be very clear, there's a lot of people out there who think that teachers get, in addition to Social Security, an annuity or a retirement. And I just want to be very clear that for those people who are required to join main PERS, which are teachers, administrators, ed techs 2s and 3s, and I'm sure I'm forgetting, they are required to join main PERS, and they get main PERS in lieu of Social Security. So we as a district do not pay any Social Security on their behalf. They instead pay into main PERS. There are other positions, however, such as bus drivers and ed tech 1s and food service and other positions that are strictly Social Security. So I don't want to give people the impression that teachers have a retirement on top of Social Security. This is actually in lieu of their Social Security, unless they have Social Security from a previous job apart from education, because they're required to participate in main PERS. So the district is required to pay that portion this year. The district's portion of main PERS increased by 17%. And you'll hear me talk about this when we talk about the budget. So into their calculation, they throw $664,000. So if you add the last page and this page, now we're up to $23,365,419.52. The last section, C, is debt service. So every year for 5 years, I'm allowed to submit an application for the lease that we pay on Pittston. So as a reminder, there are actually 2 buildings at Pittston. One of the buildings we own, which is the building that we purchased with the Easter monies, and the other building is actually leased. And it's strange because the first building is leased and the second building is owned, but we're all good. So the state is throwing money once again into our calculation for release of that space. We are running out of that. I think we're being close to being done. They only do it for a few years, but we do get it for another year. So again, if you add that in, now we're up to 23.4. So this is our EPS calculation. Basically, this is what the state says that we should be able to, based on the number of students we have, run our district for. What I will tell you is that is not the amount that we are of our current budget, but this is their calculations based on everything that we discussed. Questions? Okay. So I'm not sure what page we're on, but the next page is actually calculation of required contributions. So the way that it works, in order for the state to pay its portion of towards our district, each of our 4 towns needs to raise a certain amount of money. And we're going to get into how the state calculates that. So in section A, you'll see our 4 communities: Gardner, Pittston, Randolph, West Gardner. And what you see here is actual students who live in each of those 4 communities, which is why it's different than either our attending students or our residing students, residential students, or whatever they called it from page 2. It'll come to me. And based on that percentage, so it basically takes that entire EPS calculation and said, okay, based on these students, this is what each town would owe if they paid for education for all of their students without the state's help. And then it adds in that $43,000. So it basically calculates it without that debt service. And here's the debt service, the lease. So here's the amount that each of those 4 towns would pay if they funded education based on what the state says that we can provide education for. Questions? Okay. In the next section is the state valuation by member municipality. And this is always the thing that I get a ton of questions about, especially from our municipal members. So the state valuation is different than each town's own valuation. The state valuation is meant to be the great equalizer. It's meant to look at all of these towns across the state and try to make the valuations as fair as they can. So they make, I'm not saying that the town valuations are unfair. What I'm saying is each town has a way of evaluating property that may be different from the next. So the state does its own valuation. And that is the valuation that is used in the ED 279. It is not each municipality's own valuation. So the state uses, it's basically either a 3-year average for previous years or the previous year valuation. I will say that our valuations for these communities is based on the 3-year average. And if you would like those numbers, I have them. I'd be happy to share where those come from. The state has set the mill rate for this year at 7.29%. So based on the valuations of these properties, if you multiply their state valuation by the 7.29 mill expectation, this is how much each of those 4 communities would have to pay. The state then takes the lesser of the 2 calculations, either the state valuation or the calculation of subsidizable pupils. So obviously, for us, the lesser of the 2 calculations is the state valuation by municipality. So it's this one. So, and then what it does, what does it do here? So basically, this is the entire calculation from above. It then looks at the required calculation for each of the 4 towns, and then it actually subtracts. And that's how the state gets its calculation. It basically subtracts the mill rate expectation and valuation from the amount it says that we can run our district for by town. And that is the amount the state pays on behalf of each of the towns. So the state, our state subsidy for FY24 is $15,707,393.02. It's approximately $135,000 more than we received in the current year. Questions? So here is another page. Basically, it's the same information, the total allocation, the bottom line from that second pot that we did, the local contribution, the state's contribution, and it does a bunch of adjustments, none of which apply to us, so I'm not even going to go through them. However, there's one calculation that will apply to us as the year goes on, which is you'll hear me talk about main care, seed, private, and public. So as the year goes on, the state will pay main care seed money for both public and private on our behalf, and it will actually subtract this from our state subsidy. So you will see that I have built in with special ed something to mitigate losing that additional subsidy to put back in the money that we're getting. So based on the calculation from above, of this total allocation, the local share is 32.9%, and the state share is 67.10%. So when I said to you, I will tell you later if the state pays 100% of gifted and talented, while it appears that they throw 102% into the calculation, the state is paying for 67.10% of the actual amount that they say that we can put into, that we say that we can run our budget for. Again, this is the percentage, and the last page is just the subsidy that we will receive prior to those per month, prior to those main care seed adjustments that will occur quarterly throughout the year. And that, my friends, is the end of the ED 279 presentation. I'm sorry, it's painstaking, I know. Are there any questions? I know you're probably all glazed over by now.
Personally, I would say well done, Andrea. You have explained it incredibly well. The detail is important. So thank you. Thank you for taking the time to walk us through. I always find this to be very enlightening, even though I've heard it so many times. I always walk away feeling like I learned something. So thank you.
You're welcome.
I was going to say the same thing. I always learn something every time. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Nobody has any questions? You just need to sit with it perhaps. We'll move along now to the F year 2024 requested budget for capital. I'm sorry, I skipped one over. Capital improvement bond discussion.
Hold on, I'm going to stop sharing. Oops. There. Patty, are you going to take this conversation, or do you want to tag team, or how do you want to do this?
I guess why don't we tag team this? So at the last finance meeting, it was discussed that we should once again engage in a conversation to determine whether the school board wants to move forward with a capital improvement bond or not. Andrea has provided in one of the folders some information that we shared with you last year. So let me be really clear that you are not looking at current data. This is the data, the timeline, all of the information is from last year, but thought that it would actually give you an opportunity to refresh your memory about the types of items we were discussing that could be in a capital improvement bond. Andrea is going to be going through and presenting to you the requested budget as it stands. Please know that there is no bond payment built into that proposed budget. I don't recall last year, Andrea, how much was it that we anticipated the bond payment to be? It was somewhere around $100,000.
I don't remember what we looked at. Honestly, it was a year ago. I don't remember the term that we chose or the amount. I'm not quite sure that we ever got to that place, because when the budget came out and the heating and the oil prices went through the roof, our conversation regarding a bond basically lost steam. A lot of our project was going to be paving, and based on oil prices at that time, it was most of our capital improvement bond. It didn't seem prudent for us to move forward to be able to fund half the amount of paving that we would in other years. And conversations that I have that I will share with you later in our discussion, I will still continue to talk about the volatility of the oil markets and who I depend on for our knowledge. So I will share that with you when we start talking about the budget. But that's what happened last year, or that's what I remember happening.
So I think this is an important conversation for the Finance Committee to re-engage in. But I feel like we need to spend a little more time looking at the proposed budget first, and take a look at the proposed budget so that you can actually see where things currently stand, before we really decide whether we're going to put in a lot of time and effort into making a request to taxpayers for a bond.
I agree, what it's worth.
No, I agree with that also, and that we also perhaps need more information about when the building applications will open again, the construction applications will open again. We just need perhaps some firmer information than we have right this minute. And that could help us decide better what we want to spend where.
And what Becky's alluding to that we've talked about in previous finance meetings is that we currently have a bond that we took out for a performance contract with Siemens that we did, I want to say 8 years ago, when we had the TC Hamlin School. And even though the TC Hamlin School is no longer ours, we are continue to pay in our bond payments for work that was done at the school. And we discussed, while wanting to certainly fix our schools, that if we're discussing perhaps doing things differently or consolidating schools, that we need to be mindful and prudent about what we choose to bond. So I think it all rolls as part of a much bigger discussion. So I think Becky's right to look into when those construction applications are opening again.
Anyone else have anything? Yes, Jim.
Here, I missed my hand. I don't see where the hand is on this thing anymore to say that I want to say something. I don't think we should be looking at a bond right now at all. There's too many strange things going on in the world right now. And whether this oil price gets more volatile, less volatile, I don't think we can ask the taxpayers to go after a bond right now. And I'm in favor of a bond. I think it's a great idea for funding needed repairs, but just not right now. So my thinking.
Thank you, Jim. And I think we're on the same page about that. But as we know, to talk about doing a bond, if we even started to talk about it in the spring, it would be when, Andrea? Like next December or even later before we could?
So remember, there's in that packet is also something from Drummond Woodsum, from Greg M. You will see a schedule for spring borrowing, and for fall borrowing. So you remember that we need to go out to referendum. It's just not, we just can't go out and borrow money like other people. We need to actually have an election and let the residents vote on the bond. So it's quite a process. You actually have that document from Greg. It's old, but there's no reason that those dates don't hold. It's a guideline. So if it's something we want to pursue, we would need to be, honestly, if we were considering doing something for the fall, we would need to do it now for fall bonding with, I would think, projects starting next year, next spring. And the same thing with spring for fall, because the bonds have to go out and buy the bonds. So that it's a process.
So Jim, yeah, we're on the same page. We haven't had enough conversation. We've had little bits of conversation about it along the way, but then, as we all know, COVID happened.
I personally believe it's the right way to do for the long-term effect, but I'm just concerned about the whole volatility of the whole world right now. So I think we need to hold on and see what happens next year. Hopefully we can do something.
I don't think anybody disagrees. I think we're in agreement on that. And I would say if we were going to start bonding or start considering, that should be a fairly constant conversation for a bit of time, just so that we are fully aware of whatever it is we're thinking of doing. And I would agree, it's not for this spring, probably a little bit later on as we watch it get a little bit better, perhaps. Anybody else? Okay, seeing nothing.
Oh, actually, can I chime in real quick?
Oh, sure, Gabe. Sorry.
So yeah, I mean, I'm fine if you with not obviously doing a bond, but I really feel that we will need to put some paving money in budget. Right now, we really just have a little bit of patching in there for next budget season, but the high school, if we don't do a bond at some point in time, we need to put it in budget, at least to do the student parking lot. It's in really bad shape.
Right.
We
you're
at
right.
least to overlay it to get it by for the next 5-6 years. Something needs to be done. It's just completely falling apart. So I just wanted to put that out there. If we don't really look at a bond, we will need to add some extra money into budget for this coming year to do an overlay, at least in that parking lot, for sure.
Thank you for that reminder, Gabe. Thanks. Well, we're going to need to continue talking about that and what the best way to do that is, because you're right, the high school really is in need. Let's see, 2024 requested budget, the initial.
Becky Diane had her hand raised.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see it, Diane.
Unmute. Oh, okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'm not against anything you just said. I just think we could remember that the TC Hamlin was an elementary school, and we're not planning anything with the high school as far as elimination, even in our wildest dreams. So money spent on that is different than having a bond that we're paying or anything that we're paying on that we no longer own. It's just a part of the thinking I thought we should add.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move along then to, if there's nothing else, move along to the 23-24 initial budget.
Do you want me to take it, or?
I want you to take it. And did you resend another email with that budget attached to folks?
Yes. So the budget, those budget documents have now been dropped into the Google Drive sheet. And I also sent out an email with a separate email on a scheduled send. So everyone should have those now. Okay. So we're going to start with doing, let's see if I can share. Can everybody see, what can everybody see? Can you see my expenditure articles?
No.
No.
Okay, great. Got too many screens open trying to keep. Now, can you see it?
Yes.
Awesome. Okay. So this is our 2024 budget by expenditure article. I just want to preface that this budget is an extremely raw form, meaning basically I pulled it together over vacation. Administrators have not seen it. It's the result of a few conversations with Pat and I regarding certain things and all of the requests that have been made through ADS. So we are all seeing it for the first time together. The administrators obviously have not talked about it. But to give you an idea of where we are, our current year budget is $28,222,000. Our total for FY24 is $31,616,000 and change. So it's an increase of approximately 3.3 million or 12.03%. So these are the expenditure articles, again, are the way that the state requires that we vote on our budget. So regular instruction, there's an increase of approximately, well, currently of 592,000 or 4.95%. Special education, there's an increase of 1.2 million or 26.02%. This expenditure article is CTE. Pat has told me that we will not be required to pay tuition to CATSI. So that is why this is at 0. Other instruction is co-curricular, and it's basically co-curricular and extracurricular, and those instructional programs outside of the student day. So there's an increase of 76,000 or 10.61%. Student and staff support, that's includes pretty much almost everything that you can think of that's student-based. So library, guidance, technology, all of those other things. It includes curriculum, it includes assessment, it includes where the nurses fall. So there is an increase of 442,000 or 16.59%. System administration, it's the superintendent's office, the board, as well as the business office. There's an increase of 121,000 or 14.33%. School administration are basically the office of the principal as well as the administrative assistants and anything in those offices to run those offices. There's an increase of 72,000 and change or 4.25%. Transportation, there's an increase of 431,865. I don't know why I gave you that, but 22%. Facilities and maintenance, there's an increase of 434,352 or 13.24%. In total, other commitments is basically the amount that we pay towards food service, and we'll talk about this. There's a reduction of 45,000 or 21%. So this is our overall budget at a glance. The next document that I am going to try to find is where the increase is coming from. So can you see 2024 requested budget increase overview?
No.
Okay. So hang tight. Sorry. Okay, let's do this. And let's try this. Now can we see a document that's called 23-24 requested budget increase overview?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to try to make this a little bit bigger without losing it. Yeah, that works. So I am giving you increases at a 900-foot level. Obviously, I didn't list everything, but just broad categories. So the first category that is increases is salaries. Salary increases in this budget are 1.1 million. Included in that 1.1 million is 4 new teaching positions that we didn't, or 4 new positions that we didn't have in the current year. An ed tech 3 librarian, an additional nurse at Pittston Randolph, the nurse that we discussed at our last budget, at our last board meeting at Riverview, and a position that I'm calling business office generalist. It's another position in the business office, and we will talk about that later. I want you to know, let me back up. There are things here that I want to discuss, which is why you see zeros. So not included in salaries are additional for IDEA, which is local entitlement, Title I and Title II. But what I do want you to know is that none of our existing staff will fit in the estimated federal budgets that we anticipate for next year. So in other words, the staff that we have now, if I roll them into increases and projected insurance and benefit increases, they will not fit within what we expect to receive in funds. We have not had these conversations with Alicia and Angela and how we're going to fix that, or how we're going to address that, whether it's moving some of these positions into the budget or whether it's changing how we provide services. Those conversations have not happened, but I want you to know that at their current levels, they don't appear that they will fit. Sorry, Pat.
So just for clarification, there may be a lot of people who don't know what you're talking about. So with IDEA, local entitlement, that is federal money that we receive for special education. And we currently, as a district, we fund a number of special ed Tech 1 positions out of that particular funding source. We have Title I, that's a different fund. And that is for our remedial work. So like our literacy, some of our literacy specialists and math specialists in our elementary schools, that is also federal money. And with our Title II, also federal money, that's where we have class size reduction money and professional development. So that when we provide some professional development for our staff, that's the primary funding source that we use.
So IDEA, or local entitlement, which is a special ed grant, which can only be used for special ed, currently funds 19 of our special ed techs. That is the only thing at this point that there is no more capacity in the grant. There used to be other things in the grant. We used to be able to fund a budgeted or projected or an unknown special purpose private school out of district tuition, that grant can no longer, there's no longer room in that grant for that tuition. So, and what I'm telling you now is that federal grant will no longer fund our 19 current ed tech positions that we have. In Title I, Angela, correct me if I'm wrong, that's strictly, Title I is strictly staff, literacy specialists and ed techs, ed tech threes.
And a small percentage is required to be spent on family engagement activities.
Mm-hmm. In Title II, there's a class size reduction teacher that we use to further reduce the class size numbers at one of our schools, and every year we choose a grade level. And there's also a very small amount of curriculum monies available, professional development monies available. And what I will say is that seems to be shrinking. And I don't know whether based on next year, whether there would even be money for those professional development opportunities if we were to fund that class size reduction teacher. So I want you to know that this budget does not include those conversations. So hence the zeros. The next increase is Maine State Retirement. I talked about that briefly when I was doing the ED 279 overview, that this year is one of those employer contribution rate increases. It doesn't increase every year, but it is increasing this year by 17%. So instead of paying into Social Security for our Maine PERS members, the state needs to pay Maine PERS on their behalf, and that is increasing. Health insurance. So this, usually I start health insurance with a double-digit increase. Our medical loss ratio is decent, and I am taking a gamble that we are going to have a single-digit increase. What I have learned is that MLR, or medical loss ratio, so for those of you who don't have any idea what I'm talking about, medical loss ratio is basically the amount the insurance company that I pay in premiums versus what they pay out in claims for our district. So it's a percentage. And I think I want to say our medical loss ratio for this year is lower than 80%. But since COVID, what we've realized is that's not the entire driver for healthcare. That healthcare overall is seeing increases. So while we may have a great MLR ratio, that alone may not be the driver of how much we pay. So I just want you to know that our world has changed drastically since COVID. But I think 8%, I think we're okay. I think it's easier to cut rather than to add. I'm not quite sure that there'll be a lot of cutting. But what I don't want to do is cut in other areas if that's what we have to do, only to further reduce it in health insurance. So I'm starting this year at 8%. Questions? Tuition, special purpose private schools. This is special ed students who are being placed at a district, at a school outside of our district. It is an increase of $727,000 over the current special purpose private school placements. The next line is the main care seat expenditures based on, so for those of you who don't have any idea what I'm talking about, for those students that we send out for SPPS or special purpose private schools, for those main care eligible students, these schools can bill the state for main care covered services. For those of you who are eligible, who are knowledgeable about how main care works, basically the feds pay a percentage and the state pays a percentage. For the purpose of our conversation, for these students, we would be required to pay the state's percentage for these main care eligible students that these special purpose private schools can bill the state for main care. Energy, electricity. So currently there is no increase in our budget. Charlie and I are having conversations, and I'm sure you all want to know who Charlie is. Charlie is Charlie Agnew of Competitive Energy Services. He's the person who he and his company are who I rely on for information regarding our energy costs and needs. It's much bigger than me. We talk about market. We look at electricity. We look at diesel. We look at all of our energy. And if you have been here a while, you will also remember Charlie addressing the board regarding the solar projects that we are involved with as part of a huge consortium with Kobe College in Bowdoin. And you'll remember that conversation. And we're starting to see these solar projects go online, and we're starting to get credits from these solar projects. So it's part of a big conversation. So I have given Charlie our energy bills for the past 12 months. I'm waiting for guidance. For those of you who have been with us for the past 6 months, you remember that I've told you that our current energy supply, or let me rephrase that, our energy supply prior to December was 0.06 cents per kilowatt hour for supply. So for those of you who are aware of what the standard rate is now, you're all paying, I want to say, I think it's 11. I don't quote me, but our supply rate for the bid that we did in the fall was, I want to say, almost 3 times 6% rate. It's not that things are quite that bad. It's that the 6% rate was so good, and this is a bad time of year this is a bad year for those contracts to be expiring with all of the issues with Ukraine and other issues driving natural gas costs up. It's also driving up the cost of energy supply. So for the time being, I've left our what we budgeted for energy and electricity at what we budgeted for this year. We will continue that conversation through March as Charlie and I have those conversations. We continue to discuss how volatile the market continues to be. And while I would like to say it has settled down, it really hasn't. So that's where we are with energy. Capital improvement projects. So for those of you who were with us for our finance meeting in January, Gabe presented his 5-year capital improvement plan, and the $567,000 represents his projects that he listed in his capital improvement plan for next year. Capital improvement bond payment. So we were talking previously about discussing a bond project. I want you to know that I have not budgeted a bond payment in this budget for a potential capital improvement bond. So if that is something that we do, it will need to be added to the budget. The school revolving renovation fund bond that we were awarded in January. So that's part of a much bigger conversation. The state doesn't fund the project in its entirety. Part of the project needs to be funded locally. We will discuss that, but I did not include, based on conversations that Pat and I have had, I have not included a bond payment for that revolving renovation project. And for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, we're talking about asbestos abatement. The state is basically covering part of the project. Basically, they wipe away the debt and the remainder is ours. So we will talk about that later. Fuel transportation, this is diesel. This is based on our current rates. Again, Charlie and I will further look at this. Again, because of the volatility of the market, I'm hoping to have better pricing or better guidance within the next week or two. Special purpose transportation, private source, 106,000. That is transportation that we pay a private transportation company to transport our students to these special purpose private schools. There's a few reasons why we use them. One, we have a bus driver shortage. And two, honestly, it is far more cost effective for us to transport those students using this company than for us to do it ourselves. Every year at the end of the year, I'm required to do a transportation report based on expenditures and miles traveled. And basically it's expenditures divided by miles traveled. And there are three categories: homeless, special purpose private schools, and vocational. And it asks us, or it asks me, to divide out the amount we spend and the amount that we contract. And I believe the amount that we spend per mile is close to $5 a mile when transporting these students. The amount that we spend per mile when using this transportation company is a little over $1, maybe closer to $1.50 now. So it's beneficial to us to use this transportation company. The last increase is our bus lease. We are getting ready to go out to do a lease on our buses. For those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, MSAD11 does not own its school buses. We lease them from a company called, or we currently lease them from a company called John T. Sear. It's a 3-year agreement typically. And Sear covers basically all of the services and repairs on the buses. So we don't need to hire mechanics. We don't need to stock tires. They take care of everything. It's a soup to nuts contract. While we employ our bus drivers, the buses are not ours, and it's time for us. Our current bus lease is expiring at the end of this year. It is my hopes that I am able to get this bus bid out within the next 2 weeks so that we can have them back before we settle this contract. There's an amount in there that I see as being the increase, and I'm hoping that if we actually get bids, they will be better than what I've estimated. So overall, this is 3.4 million of that increase that I shared with you earlier. Any questions about this document?
Yes, I have one question.
Sure.
Andrea, with the bus lease, I know we're supposed to be looking at electric buses mandated by the state, as I understand it. What's the deadline for that? And are we looking at possibly any of those in this new contract?
We are not. We had a conversation regarding buses a few finance committee meetings ago. That infrastructure would not be in place because it's far more than just buying electric buses. You need the charging stations, and there's a whole infrastructure that goes along. And since we're only allowed to bid for so many years for bus leases, we would not have this in place. This is basically an extension of the current buses that we have. I think Gabe mentioned, I always ask Gabe to review the bus bid before we go out to bid. I think Gabe was able to shave a bus or two. So we may be looking at leasing fewer buses than we have in years past. We've also had conversations about perhaps getting additional vans to try to take care of some of our transportation needs. But I shared that conversation with Pat today about our regarding our private source transportation and how much cost effective it is. So, I mean, these are all conversations that we might have during our bus bid, but Gabe and I will, and Pat will absolutely share those conversations with you in finance.
When is the drop dead date when we have to think about having electric? I think 70% of our buses have to be electric. I don't remember by what date. Do you by any chance know?
I thought it was 2040, but I think the law says also.
No, that's 100.
Oops, I think it says when practical. So I don't think we're required. I don't think we're required. You know, if you talk to some of these districts that have electric buses, they can only go for so long. And some of our routes are quite long, as we've discussed, I guess, amongst ourselves. So I don't know that it would be practical for all of our routes. I think it depends on where they are with buses and where we are with routes when the time comes for us to I guess, pull that trigger.
Yeah, I'm not in favor of it, frankly, but I'm concerned that there is a date. I think that 2040 is when we were supposed to have 100%, as I understood it.
Just Pat, do you remember, Pat, the year that we're required?
I don't recall. I think the way the language was written is that they were trying to encourage school districts to move toward having electric buses, and that the state would be carbon neutral by, I don't remember the exact date. It may have been 2040. I don't recall. I would have to go back and look at my notes. So I think we're fine right now, Jim. As Andrea said, we are not in a position at the present time to be able to purchase or lease an electric bus because we don't have the infrastructure in. And the infrastructure is incredibly expensive. I think we've shared that with the finance committee in the past. And to install just one charging unit that allowed a bus to be charged within a couple hours, one was about $125,000, if I recall. And so we're talking about a pretty sizable investment in the infrastructure when we move in that direction.
No, I'm not proposing we do that. I just want to be, if there's a date when we have to do it, I just want to know ahead of time, but that's fine. I'm all in favor of staying with diesel buses, frankly. So thank you.
The only thing that I would add to this conversation about the increase overview is that most of the salary increases are a result of contracts that have already been negotiated. So I believe there's only one or two.
There's still two contracts that have not been negotiated, so that that number includes estimates, and hopefully at least one of them will be finalized in the near future before the budget is officially finalized.
Okay. So the next document that I have for you is the worksheet, and I'm going to go through it for those folks who have never seen the budget worksheet. So this is the document that we use, and honestly, it has a lot of the same elements in it as the ED 279. So in the right-hand corner, you see the current year budget, this year's budget, and the budget that we are discussing for 23-24. And as I stated earlier, there's a 12.03% increase or a $3.3 million. Over here, I have miscellaneous revenue. It's revenue that I am expecting from all other sources other than the towns in the state. As a school district, we get most of our revenue from state in the form of subsidy and from each of the 4 communities, but there is additional revenue. So I'm going to go through this additional revenue so that you can see what I'm talking about. So every year at the end of the school year, there's money, there are funds that we've collected that haven't been spent, and that goes into what we call an unallocated fund balance. And for those of you listening or watching, the state restricts what school districts can do with their unallocated fund balance. Basically, the budget that is passed, we cannot exceed. And any money that is left over and put into unallocated fund balance can only be used to buy down budgets in another fiscal year. So what I'm actually doing is using some of the money that we have remaining from previous budget years to reduce the amount that the local taxpayers, the 4 communities, will have to pay. So this is the amount that we have typically used for carry. I also refer, you will hear me also refer to it as carry forward. So this is the amount that we typically use. State agency client tuition. Honestly, this is pretty volatile. It's based on state wards who are placed within the district. The district bills the state monthly for expenses associated with those students, and we see the revenue coming in. Any year, it depends on how many placements we have within the district. Tuition estimate. So we receive tuition from other area school districts who send their students here who do not have superintendent's agreements. So for example, most of our tuition is for high school students who come from RSU 12. They don't have a secondary high school, so they tuition their students out to various school districts. And this is the revenue that I anticipate us receiving. Interest is interest on the funds that we have. I may tweak this enough a little bit, but it won't be much. With the feds continuing to raise interest rates, I may tweak it a little, but it won't be enough for us to even worth having conversation about. Miscellaneous revenue is revenue that we receive for facilities use. It may be monies that we get back from a PTA, PTG, for transporting students on a co-curricular field trip. As you remember, the district or the board has decided years ago that it will not fund co-curricular field trips. So typically PTGs reimburse the district for transporting those students. And there's also some of that in transportation fees as well. Athletic gate receipts and admissions. Those are monies that I get from high school, primarily gate receipts and the musical. Those monies are sent to the central office to further buy down the budget. And you will see that I have budgeted some renewable energy credits or RECs that we're getting from the solar project. We're starting to receive credits. So I anticipate us being able to, that we'll be receiving money from that. So if I add all that miscellaneous revenue, it's basically 1.7 million. And you'll see it over here. It's going to reduce the budget that we're asking for. So here's our net budget This line is actually right from our ED 279. If you remember from, I don't know, an hour ago, you heard me talk about the mill rate. This is the state mill rate. This is the amount of the required contribution, and this is the state contribution based on what the state says that we can run our school just for based on our students. If I subtract this amount, which is the amount that the state says we can run our district for from our actual budget for next year, the difference is what we call additional local. It's the additional amount that we require from the locals to actually fund our budget. So here below is the next thing that you see is a comparison of our valuation from this year's budget to next year's budget, the percentage. So the way that the required local contribution is divvied up, it's basically a percentage of the valuation. And that's also from the ED 279. The additional local, this amount is divvied up by the same percentage. So 14 million is the amount that Gardner, Pittston, Randolph, and West Gardner would need to fund come up with to be able to fund our budget. So the last section is the comparison of where we are this year to where we would be next year. So currently our 4 towns contribute 10.8 million. Based on this budget, they would be required to fund 14.1 million, which is an increase of 3.2 million. And as you see, it would be an increase of 1.1 million to Gardner, an increase of 700 and change to Pittston, a $323,000 increase to Randolph, and a little bit more than a $1 million increase to West Gardner. And as you remember, those percentages are driven by state valuation. Questions? Wow. So either I am doing a phenomenal job at explaining or everybody is sleeping and I'm just sitting here talking to myself.
No, you're doing a wonderful job. But I now know why periods at the high school are 80 minutes long when it comes to math and geometry. And it's a lot of numbers.
It is a lot of numbers. So the last document that I believe that I provided, and I'm not going to go through this, is when we look at the budget by expenditure article, it really doesn't tell you very much. And I wanted, if I print the budget out by school, it's almost 150 pages. And I kind of wanted a way for you to be able to delve into it without looking at 150 pages. Not that 88 pages is a lot better than 150, but I found a way of sorting it. So I'm going to let you know what you're looking at. So this is basically our budget grouped by, and I want to say function. So what we see over here are basically the federal accounting codes that we're required to use for expenses and revenue. This happens to be expenses. And basically I grouped it by the third set, and I want to say they call that function. I always get program and function mixed up, but anyway, it's the third set. So it's basically grouped by the third set, and it basically tells us what the function of this expenditure group is. So this group obviously is instruction. So everything that you see for a ways is all of classroom instruction. And if I keep scrolling and keep scrolling and keep scrolling, eventually you will see what the increase to instruction is. And just so that you know, the state also classifies co and extracurricular as instruction, which is why you see volleyball here. That is just how they code. So that is the increase to all of those expense lines that you see. The next coding function is technology. Technology is divided into two. So you'll see some technology here, and then you'll see it later. The technology that you see here is for one-to-one devices that are supposed to be used in the classroom. So that's how that's broken out. Social work, which includes guidance, is the next section. Actually, I lied. It breaks it out separately. So social workers and guidance. Health services, which obviously are your nurses. Psychological services, which is special education. Speech and language, again, special education for speech and language services. Audiology, again, special education. Occupational therapy, again, special education. Physical therapy, again, special education. 504, which is different than special ed. For those of us who work in here, there are students who need accommodations, but they aren't deemed special ed. We refer to them as 504 students. This is where 504 expenditures reside. The next section is curriculum development. They're all of their funding. The instructional coaches, that's broken out. PLCSS training, which is basically mentoring for our new staff. Library and media. Geez, I thought I did this easy. Instructional technologies, the rest of Terry's budget that isn't actually in the classroom. Academic assessment, so it's testing that falls under Angela's budget, which is separate than curriculum. Board of Education, obviously, self-explanatory. They break Board of Education down by sub areas. So here's the board, here's the budget, the cost for the budget referendum, the cost for the audit services that you're required to have, and cost for legal. Executive administration is actually the superintendent's office. The next section is kind of weird. It combined Alicia's office, and for those of you who don't know who Alicia is, she's our director of special education. They actually combined her with the way that I broke it out, actually combined her with the athletic director. So the state actually separates the athletic director's position separate from the rest of co and extracurricular, and they call it special administration. So they're grouped together. It's weird. So you're looking at a combination of both in here. See what else is in here. Office of the principal, obviously the principal, the administrative assistant, and everything that it takes to run those offices. What are we doing? Graduation expenses, fiscal administration is the business office. Health services for staff members, affirmative action. We have an affirmative action person, that's Terry. She has a small budget. And then operation and maintenance of plant, they break out in several different areas. 2610, for example, is care and cleaning of the building. 2620 that you'll see next is actually the operation of the building where it's the maintenance and maintenance of the physical building. 2630 is outside, including fields. So you see that here. This is more maintenance, district vehicles, the school resource officer, you will see under, I just saw that. Sorry. So under security, under Gabe's budget is where the school resource officer, that's how the coding is. So you will see the school resource officer that we have budgeted for next year, as well as security services for some of our football and basketball games. Capital improvement is the actual payments for that bond that the performance contract that I spoke of earlier, that we're still making those payments. So that's what you see in capital improvement, student transportation, those expenses. What else do we see? Special transportation, special needs. So those are those special ed students who are transported not within the district, but out of district. So the state requires that we code that transportation differently, as well as transportation to and from vocational, as well as transportation of homeless students. So we have those students as well. And the last section is the Office of Director of Food Services. So this section actually, we no longer, or we have never funded our entire food district budget. So we basically, in the years past, have funded a portion of the food service budget. It's a combination of federal reimbursement, as well as our allocation or our appropriation to food service. And in the past few years, I need to take a sip, sorry. The state, as I mentioned earlier, excuse me, has made the decision to, wow, sorry, to fund or to pay lunches for students in full. So the past 2 years, it's been a very interesting way of funding food service. So food service is not allowed to make money. And we put money in our budget to cover what the program and the federal funding, basically that gap. And because now the state is feeding students, we are actually seeing additional subsidy from the state. So much, in fact, that we ended last year with money in the food service budget. So typically what we do in our budget is we budget enough to cover that gap. I looked at what we typically would budget for food service to cover that gap, and I subtracted the amount that we had remaining in food service to actually reduce the amount that we have in our budget to cover the gap. And as I said, we no longer have a gap, but we don't know, I guess the conversation that we need to have, and I don't really know that tonight's the night, is we need to have a conversation. We don't know how long the state is going to continue to feed students. And I've heard during this administration, honestly, it may be forever, but eventually if the state no longer does that, you're going to be required to put money back in. So I'm trying to find a sweet spot between having money in the budget in the event and not wanting to drive the budget up any further than it is right now. But know that the year that they stop funding or they stop paying for student lunches, we are going to have to add 200, it's typically over 200,000 to our budget. So I didn't want to create that cliff. So this is what I've done, pending additional conversation with the board regarding looking for your guidance on how we wanted to deal with this. It may be that your guidance will be that we're going to, remove this additional funding in our budget, and that when the time comes that, excuse me, the state no longer pays for meals for students, we will deal with it at that point. So there, for those of you who want to look into lines and sections and want more than just the increases by expenditure article, there's something for you to look at. Questions? Sorry. Nobody has anything to say?
And sorry, Andrea, I would take over, but
You're fine. It's all good.
Okay.
So if we don't have any questions, then I'm going to move it back to either you or Becky on where to go next with this.
yeah, I guess I would just leave it with where you began this conversation. This is the first time that administrators have seen this budget as well as finance committee members. So this is just the first blush. Administrators have a meeting on Thursday, and we will be spending some time analyzing the budget. And so for those of you who've been on the finance committee, on the board for a while, you're familiar with this process. It's a long, difficult process, but it involves back and forth between administrators analyzing what is absolutely necessary and making sometimes some really difficult decisions in order to bring the budget into a place where the finance committee and the board feels comfortable moving forward and sending a budget to the taxpayers. So there's a lot of work ahead. Administrators will be meeting frequently now. And at the end of this meeting, I would like for the finance committee to discuss some additional meetings for you as well. Probably at this point, we should all be meeting on a weekly basis, if possible, so that we can really dive into some of the points that Andrea raised and make some really difficult decisions on how best to proceed. So I would leave it there for tonight. I am looking at the clock. We're already 2.5 hours in. I know I knew it was going to be a long night, and we have a few more items. There may be a couple things that we can kind of fly through because I would like for us to be done by no later than 8:30. I think a 3-hour meeting is probably sufficient, especially after viewing all of those numbers. And Andrea, you're doing an amazing job. I'm really, really pleased and impressed by the clarity in which you're providing detail. This is difficult information to absorb. It's complex, and you're doing it in a way that is easy for board members, administration, and hopefully members of the public to understand. So thank you for that. So Becky, I would recommend just moving along and going to the food service equipment conversation.
All righty, food service equipment.
So every year when we do Linda's budget, which is honestly a separate budget that is not included in our regular budget, I ask her to look at her equipment needs. She provided 3 pieces of equipment that she needs. And you have that in your packet. Basically, she's asking for a new dishwasher for LER, a planetary mixer for Pittston, and a reach-in freezer at the high school because the high school freezer does not accommodate. I also included in that folder, I asked Linda to provide a reason why she needed the equipment, and that is there for you to look at in her words and not mine. Basically, some of the equipment is old and failing. And there are just some things that we've outgrown space, such as the reach-in freezer. So the ask that I have for you tonight is, rather than budgeting these additional expenditures in our budget for next year, the ask is that we use some of that money in food service that I said was remaining to purchase these 3 items. They do not total more than $20,000. usually food service items are crazy expensive. I don't really find any of these expensive. And I support all of her requests for the reasons that she mentioned or she stated. So we are asking for you to allow us to do that rather than adding 20,000 to our budget for next year.
Is there anyone, are there questions or is there anyone who would make a motion to approve these 3 expenditures so that we can then take this request to the board for full board approval on Thursday?
I would make a motion to support that plan.
Thank you, Jack. And Diane, second. Are there questions or comments, conversation?
I don't think we need to take it to the full board, do we, Pat?
Okay.
If the finance committee approves it. Usually the finance committee's approved expenditures in excess of 5,000.
Correct. Are each item under 5,000, each piece of equipment?
No, they're all over. The 3 of them total 20,000. And just so that you know, while you are seeing the final bid on all 3, I have required that Linda get 3 bids for each piece of equipment so that we are taking the lowest bid on each piece of equipment. So I just wanted you to know that she has done her due diligence.
Andrea, I think what we need to do is take a look at policy.
Okay.
And if the policy says the threshold is 5,000 and each piece of equipment exceeds 5,000, then we need the finance committee to make the recommendation to the board.
Okay.
If we are wrong and that threshold is not 5,000, it's just been a while since we've done this, so I just don't remember. If we had changed that number and it's higher, and that which means that the finance committee has the authority, then we will let the finance committee know prior to the board meeting.
Sounds like a plan.
Is that fair?
Yep.
Becky, does that sound reasonable?
Yep. Yes, I just want to make sure we stick with our policy about how we do things. So yes, yep.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Moving along.
I didn't have a vote. I just had a first
We had
and
a
a
motion
second.
and a second.
Right.
Nobody wanted to say anything. So all those in favor, can we have a raised hand?
Okay. I
Check
think
it out.
that's unanimous.
Okay, yep. Looks like it's unanimous. Thank you. All righty, next on is school revolving renovation fund.
You want me to continue going or do you want
Yeah, you might as well. You're on the roll.
So for those of you who have been on the finance committee, you've heard us discuss submitting 2 applications for revolving renovation projects with the state. One of the projects that Gabe and the engineer submitted was for removal of abatement of asbestos, removal of asbestos at the high school in the cafeteria and in the little gym. And the second project was the catwalk. And I think Pat informed you at the January meeting that our project for the asbestos abatement was approved. So based on the letter that you have a copy of, it's basically the approval document. We have 30 days to move on this. And that was from, I believe the letter was sent at the end of January. Basically, we only have a couple of days. So I want you to know right up front the timeliness of it and how this is going to work. So Gabe's, if you open the SRRF award, we were approved for 68.77% of our project, which is actually the same amount or the same percentage as our ED 279, our state share for the current year, okay? And then the remaining 31.23% is the amount that we would have to borrow to complete the entire project as estimated by Gabe and the engineer. In order for us to borrow that $80,000, we would need to go out to referendum. And for those of you who don't know what I'm referring to, we would need to have a vote like the budget referendum. We would actually have to call a vote, and the citizens would vote whether or not they would authorize for us to borrow that $80,000. The exception to this is if we find a way to fund that $80,000 without having to borrow it. So I mentioned to Pat that I thought that we always have money left over at the end of the year. And that I know that we have not tapped into our contingency for facility use. So I would like to use the 50,000 that we have in contingency from facility use, as well as some of our other savings, to make that match so that we do not have to go out to referendum for the school revolving renovation fund. So that is the ask. Whether or not the board would like to try to fund it out of the current year budget, or whether the board would prefer to go to referendum to borrow the money from the main bond bank. If the board decides that it wants to borrow the $80,000 from the main bond bank, we have 2 days to submit application to the bond bank, because that is when the 30 days closes for this grant award. So we would need to begin that process.
So 80,000 seems like a small amount to bond, and like a lot of legwork, advanced work for a small-ish amount of money. Do you feel confident that you can find $80,000 in this year's budget?
I do not see, so the goal every year is to try not to overspend your budget. As long as I've been here, we've never overspent our budget. We seem to always have enough to have carryover for an additional year. So rather than go out to referendum, I know that we will have at least 80,000 remaining in this year's budget. I am confident of that. Would I rather reduce our carry forward by 80,000 than go out to referendum? The answer is yes.
Absolutely.
So my recommendation to you is that you allow for us to fund the remainder of the project with funds in this year's budget. If that is the case, well, either way, the other part of this is that I've included in that folder a motion that you're going to have to make at the board meeting to basically accept that SRRF to be able for us to proceed with the borrowing or the non-borrowing, and to basically accept our portion. So the question that was asked of me is, well, what happens if our project comes in less than estimated? If our project comes in less than estimated, the state is only going to reimburse us for 68.77% of the project cost. So it's not like we can buy down our portion and have the state fund the rest. So that percentage remains the same regardless of the bottom line of the project. So I know that it was mentioned that we thought the project could come in less than what we originally estimated. We will be required, however, per Greg M, to pick up 31.23% of the project regardless. Questions?
That makes sense. Questions from board members? Questions from board members?
Seems like we should get moving on it. I don't think we ought to borrow anything.
I agree, Jim.
I agree. If we can do this, we should do it. So we need a motion and I'm sorry, Pat, go ahead.
I just want to say, and for clarity, the reason that this project may come in under the estimate is we had to build in a contingency, as you do for most projects, and we had to build in some legal fees. So depending what happens there, if we don't need the contingency, if we don't need the legal fees, we do anticipate that the overall cost will be less than what was approved.
And I only asked because I anticipated that someone was going to ask me what would happen if the project was less. So I wanted to make sure that I had an answer for you and that it was the right answer. So
You've anticipated our needs. That's good.
I try.
You work hard at that. So is there someone who would make a motion?
I'll move.
Thank you, Jim. And a second?
I'll second.
No further questions or comments from anyone on the board? All right, then. All those in favor of bringing this forward to the board? Thank you very much. Hi, Jack. Motion carries. We'll bring this to the board. And finally, I think finally, unless somebody can dream up something else.
No, actually not finally. You're looking at the agenda that was sent out earlier this week. There's actually an amended that has a couple more items. I would say if we can sit tight on the adult ed regionalization update at this point, you do have some information in your Google Drive. So there's a lot there. So maybe you want to read that first, and then at your next meeting, we can give you an update. But there are two other items to discuss. One, we want to give you an update on the bus bid. And maybe, Andrea, you've already talked about that a little bit. Are you feeling like you're all set?
There is nothing else I have to say about the bus bid unless the board, the committee has questions regarding.
Okay, then we're good with that one. Then the last piece is the business office generalist. We have been talking for a number of years about the central office being understaffed and the business office being understaffed. And I've talked about the need for an HR person. In having further conversations with Andrea, looking at the skills of the staff that we currently have, the feeling is that we really need to have a business office generalist, someone who can come in, support the staff who are there, and who can fill in for staff members who might be absent should something happen. For example, the only backup person that we have to be able to do payroll is Andrea. We already know that Andrea works 24/7 and never takes a vacation. If we really want to make sure that we take care and preserve the health of our staff members, right, we need to make sure that we provide enough support in the central office. So you already saw that Andrea has that based on the conversation that she and I have, we've added that into the proposed budget. This committee has discussed this position in the past, or a similar position, and you last year told us that a position needed to be added to the budget. So you've seen that. But my concern tonight is having us wait until July to fill the position. Because summer is the busiest time of the school year, right? And that's when the central office is so terribly busy. And so if we start training someone in July, then Andrea's summer is going to look just like Andrea's summer did this past year. So we actually have some funds set aside in our federal American Rescue Plan that I budgeted some money in that particular federal account to provide some support to the business office. We haven't filled that position. And so we're here to ask tonight that if the finance committee is indeed supportive of adding the much needed position to the central office, could we look at hiring the person now, advertising, trying to find an individual and bringing them on board this spring versus waiting until the summer months? So that's the request.
Can I add a little, do you mind if I add a little bit?
Not at all.
So When I first started in years ago, there used to be 4 people in the business office, and that is the back office. And when I took the position of business manager, we thought we could reduce it to 3. So for years, we've managed to get by with 3. A lot of the things, there's additional requirements being asked of us by the state and by a lot of other things. We've incorporated technology to make other people's lives easier, but it has resulted as increased responsibility and an increased workload in my office. So for example, we used to have paper timesheets that administrative assistants used to collect and send to central office. Now it's all being done electronically, which is requiring a greater oversight by my office. It's relieved the administrative assistants from that portion, but it's created burden. So while we've done things to streamline, we've added responsibility in my office. The frontline central that I talked about, while we are no longer chasing forms, it's a different kind of additional workload that has been placed on the office. As Pat mentioned, I am the backup for payroll. And I don't know if those of you have been watching the newspapers, but we have school districts where a superintendent resigned because of issues with payroll and payroll issues. And honestly, I've been reading more and more about them in the news lately. I don't know that having me as the payroll backup is a good short-term plan or a good long-term plan when there are other things that I need to do. In addition, last summer, we lost our accounts payable person. It was all Ginger and I could do in addition to our own work to cover what needed to be done until we hired this person and got them. There just isn't enough time in the day. And this was in June when all of our expenditures and bills were basically down to minimal. So there is definitely that need. There just isn't enough time for our accounts payable person to pay all the bills within 30 days. There's just, so it used to be, we used to order from School Specialty. Now we're ordering from Amazon and WB Mason. And if somebody orders 50 things on an order, Amazon may send 50 separate invoices as they ship each individual item. So if you think about it, 50 different invoices, the same thing, you do the same thing for one invoice for each as you do for 50. So there's a lot of additional load being placed on the office, and we're not getting to things like and I don't mean to whine, but there's a stack of things in the copy room that we've been meaning to get to when we have downtime. It's been there for 5 years. There are just things that need to be taken care of that we can't get to on a day-to-day basis. So I know this isn't a great year to be asking for an additional person, but based on the headlines of other school districts, I think that we really need to have some backup in place for my office because we are running on a skeletal crew. So.
And I would encourage members of the committee and anyone from the public, if you look at our per pupil cost for system administration, it's at $394.81, and at the state average is $537.98. So we are well below the state average. I think generally when we've looked at it, the percentage of our total budget that we spend on the central office is considerably lower than most school districts.
I also want to mention, Deborah, you didn't even mention how long it takes for you to prepare the audit, and that we have a flawless and clean audit every year. And that's because you look after those things. But in looking after all the things as well as you do and as accurately as you do, you have boxes in the copy room that have been there for 5 years. And that means that there's not enough. And we don't pay people to work 24/7.
No.
We need to be respectful and make allowances and realize when we need help. And that's
You
what
know,
Jim is doing.
last year when one of our staff members in the business office had COVID, I mean, most people when they're sick are allowed to be sick when they're sick. I mean, my staff is amazing. I cannot say enough things about my staff and what they produce. They're just amazing. I have people who are working sick and who are on vacation with COVID. And I think when people are sick, they should be allowed to be sick and not expected to help produce payroll from afar. I just think the ask is too big. And, you know, the next time that someone has a medical issue, they may not be able to do that. And we need to have somebody who can carry the remainder of that load.
And we do a disservice when we don't allow people to understand how much work it takes and what it takes to make us successful and accurate. And our business office needs to be those things. And it is those things, but it's because the people that are your staff, as you said, are working so hard without enough help. So I would personally support the hiring of a person as soon as possible. Other
We
members?
need a motion on this?
Yes. Does anybody on the finance committee have anything they want to say? If not, Jim, then go.
Yeah, I was sold on this when she first mentioned it 2.5 hours ago. And we need this for ages. So
Yes.
I move that we hire this person as quickly as we possibly can. It's the school district is not a business, but this is a good business decision. So my
There's your
motion, do it.
There's the motion and a second by Diane. Nobody's going to say anything because nobody says anything. No questions or comments. So all those in
Oh.
favor?
No, all I was gonna say is that Andrea is amazing. That's all.
It was amazing. Thank you, Megan. All right. So all those in favor? All right. So we will bring this to the board meeting on Thursday also.
Becky, did Chris have his hand up?
Yes,
Or was he
did.
just voting?
He's fancy. He votes with his.
I was just voting.
Yeah.
So then, given that it's 8:21, I'm sure folks are tired. This is a long meeting and we have another meeting on Thursday night. Meeting dates. As I said, I think we are at a place where we need to begin meeting on a regular basis. The finance committee usually meets on Tuesdays. So can we book every Tuesday night at 5:30? And if something comes up and we don't need it, we can always cancel it, but at least we can get it on the book. So starting March 7th.
Yep.
I have a question.
Have listening.
Yes.
We have next Tuesday night, we have sense making.
At 4 and at 6. For only those board members who participated in the community conversation. And we set those up, we designed it so that board members who are going to be at the finance committee meeting could participate in the 4 o'clock session and then still have time to get to the finance meeting at 5:30.
Excellent. Okay.
Jim had a question.
Is it possible? I know this gets complicated. Can we keep these meetings shoot for 2-hour meetings rather than 3-hour meetings? Because after the first 2 hours, everybody's eyes glass over and I'm pretty much done. I can tell you that much.
Yeah, I think, Jim, these normally are 2-hour meetings. Today was a bit unusual because we had so many things that needed to be covered. But I'm with you. We
Okay.
will try to target just a 2-hour meeting.
Sounds
We
good.
have that deer in the headlights look right now.
Yeah.
Except there's 2 cute little kiddos over there. sitting on Jack's shoulder. Hi, guys. Thanks for participating. This is all for you. So there's nothing else tonight, correct?
Yeah, I know Josh is here, but if Josh really doesn't mind, if it's late, if we could just kind of post that to next meeting, that would be helpful.
And if that works, Josh, can we maybe put him at the beginning of the agenda so that he feels like he has
Yes.
there? Okay.
Yep.
All right then.
Okay.
Thumbs up from Josh. He knows how to do it too. I love that.
Thank you,
All
Josh.
right. Yes, thank you so much. Everyone be safe, stay warm. Maybe we'll have a snow day tomorrow.
Oh, don't even talk
even
to
joke
me.
about
That's
that.
not funny. All
No,
right,
it's
let's
not.
publicly admit today was a wrong decision, okay?
Today was the best decision you could make with the information that you had at the time.
Yep. So, all right.
Universe is laughing at us. There you go.
Yeah.
That's
Terry,
right.
thank you very much. Drive safely.
Yes, thank you, Terry. You have a ways to go. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Andrea. Thank you, Terry.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.